Hi everyone, Wade Thomas with Black Tie Barn Candle Company. On this channel we talk about candle making as well as candle making business. If you are interested in learning more about running a candle business or candle making even as a hobby, please hit subscribe and hit the bell notification to be alerted whenever I post new videos. And if this is your first time visiting the channel, welcome, glad to have you. I hope you enjoy the content. I've got a lot more to come. And if you are a current subscriber, then welcome back. Today's video is going to be a demonstration and walkthrough of how to use the wax review and selection worksheet that I had put together. Now, I referenced this in another video that I'll link up here and as well in the description that is reviewing 5 of the most common and popular waxes that candle makers first sample when they start diving into candle making for the first time. I thought it would be beneficial to have a separate video showing you how this worksheet works, essentially. I put it together basically to help initially me when I'm comparing different waxes and all the factors that I want to measure in a wax. And we'll get into those when I do the screen share. But I just wanted to go through in detail and show you how the worksheet works and how you can customize it to work for you the best. All candle makers have different preferences. Some of us care more about fragrance, some care more about looks, some care more about cost, and some care more about the type of wax it is, soy, coconut, paraffin, for example. And so out of the box, this worksheet right off the bat is in kind of this default mode where everything is factored evenly. But you can completely customize it so that when you're sampling, testing, and comparing waxes to one another, you can design it to fit your needs. So hopefully you find this video helpful. And if you have any questions, just please leave it in the comment. And I am curious, what factor do you care the most about when you're choosing a wax? What factor do you care most about in your overall candle? I'm really curious to see what everyone's answers would be. And then one last thing, this tool is completely free to you. It is in the description below. It's just a link that takes you to the worksheet. Then you can just make a copy and redesign it, save it to your own documents. It's in Google Drive format right now. If that doesn't work for you, let me know. I'll see what I can do to get it in a different format. But I did it in Google Drive as a Google Sheet because that should work for almost everyone. But anyways, it is available to you in the description. It's completely free. If you feel like, and throw me a small little donation, maybe a cup of coffee, something like that, you're more than welcome to. I'll have it linked. No pressure whatsoever at all. It is a completely free tool that I'm offering just to help out candle makers. But if you're feeling froggy and you want to throw a few bucks at it, well, I mean, I'm not going to stop you. Hopefully you enjoy this, and let's get into the video. Okay, so this is what the worksheet looks like in its default settings. And we're going to just kind of go logically here, and I'll just talk about how the worksheet works. The main table is where the blue categories start, and you can see I have 5 sample waxes, wax A through wax E, under the wax type. Those are, all of these fields are a required field for this worksheet to work properly. Next to the wax type, you're going to see several categories. There's 2 categories that have a black bar above them, and the reason is the first category is shrinkage, the other one is fragrance load. Now I talk about this in more detail in the other video, but the reason these have black bars above them is they are not calculated in my scores. And just to summarize the reasons again, shrinkage can be a good thing or a bad thing. It just depends on the type of shrinkage, the type of wax you're using, and whether or not the shrinkage in your wax leads to sinkholes. Many times it doesn't. In fact, several waxes are designed to shrink on purpose and in a uniform fashion, while others, it's kind of random shrinkage and contraction of the wax throughout the jar, which causes sinkholes. That's the bad type of shrinkage. But because it can be good or bad, so I left it out of the calculations intentionally. But if you feel like it is important, something you just don't want to deal with at all, you're more than welcome to just rename one of the other categories to shrinkage, and we'll talk about how you can customize the categories in a minute. And then the second one is fragrance load, and I talk about this in detail in the wax review video that I just posted as well. Fragrance load is not a determining factor on how well a fragrance performs or a wax performs. Some waxes throw much better at 6% than some waxes do at 10%. And so the load, the capacity that the fragrance can hold, really isn't as important as how well the fragrance throws. And so I left that out of the calculations, and it's more here for informational purposes, just so you know when you're looking at your wax what the max load is, but it's completely optional. So that being said, that leaves 10 categories remaining, and all 10 categories are calculated into the rating system. And because there's 10 total categories, it's based on a scale of 100. By default, every category is treated the same. They all have the same weight, and which is 10% each. And you'll notice that above the default category here, you'll see a 0.10, 0.10, 0.10 above each one of these categories, and that is because each one of them I have as a default weight, which again, that just means that every category is being considered the same importance. And then on the far right side, you'll see the total score, and this is just going to add up all the scores, irrelevant of what the weight is, and it will just give you the overall total score if you were to add all of them together. The weighted score then would be the total score depending on the weight that you give each category. And we'll run through an example so this will make more sense. But before we get into that, these blue categories above where it says default, if you wanted to weigh certain factors heavier than others, for example, you care more about cost, or you care more about look, or you care more about ease of use, or more about fragrance, then you could change these categories to have a different weight. There's 10 categories. You can rank them 1 through 10 on importance, 1 being the most important to you, 10 being the least important. And to do that, you just change the drop down on each one. And again, we'll go through an example that shows this. On the right-hand side, these are what calculations are based off of. So I show the ranks 1 through 10 and the weighted points based off of each one of those categories if you choose to use weighted calculations. Now, I have left this so that you can edit these. If you feel like your first 3 should be weighted more, you can adjust them. Right now, as you can see, this is 25%, 20, 15, 12, all the way down to 2% for the weighted factor of 10. You can edit these. Just make sure at the bottom that they do equal 1. And then next to that is you'll see the scale. Now this scale, I'm using a 5-point scale. 10 seemed to be too much, 3 isn't enough, 5 seemed about perfect. So I use 1 is poor, 2 is below average, 3 is average, 4 is above average, and 5 is superior. I wouldn't change these, but if you want to use different descriptions, you can, but I would leave it a 5-point scale, just like I would leave this a 10-point scale. Everything on this worksheet is based off of those, and if you try to change either one of these, it will really kind of break the worksheet. That being said, everything else is customizable. So if you don't like one of these categories and you want to change it entirely, for example, and we'll look at this in one of the examples, if you don't like hot weather shipping, if you don't care about how well the wax holds up in heat when it's being shipped, you can change that to something else. You can change that to color. You can change that to whether or not it is a natural wax or soy content, for example, if you care more about that. So you can rename these to whatever category fits your preferences. I left out color just because color is kind of a hard one to score. Some people don't use color at all. Some people use color but don't care about how vibrant the color is. Some people want really rich colors, while others people want more of these pastel looks. So instead of throwing that in there, I figured if anyone wants to use that as a factor, they can add it themselves and set their own rating scale for that. But I did include 10 categories that I think most people seem to care about, especially early on in their candle making. With that being said, let's go ahead and do an example. So I have 5 waxes listed here based off the categories that I have by default. The first category is how well I think this wax is priced and availability. So cost and availability is the first one. And again, 1 being very poor. In this case, it would be very expensive or not very available. And then 3 is about average and 5 being the best. So in this case, it would be the most affordable and highly available. So every category, 1 through 5, might mean something a little bit different, but essentially 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, 1 being low, 5 being high. And then the next category is readiness/cure time. So some waxes are ready quickly. As soon as they settle and firm up, they're ready to go. Other waxes take a little while to kind of cure, so to speak, where the fragrance throw might take a little longer to fully be there, or you might just need to give it more time for whatever reason. Jar adhesion, and this is referring to wet spots. Again, this doesn't affect the burn or the performance of the candle, but a lot of people, especially starting out, really care about how it looks, the wax looks inside the jar. Is it pulling away from the jar? Is it adhering really nicely to the jar? So that's what that category is for. Again, we're going to skip shrinkage. I will generally just put low, moderate, or high here, but I don't calculate it in. Surface and texture. This would be the aesthetics of what the wax looks like on the surface or the sides of the jar. This is where you could maybe talk about frosting or rough tops, things like that. Hot weather shipping. The more and more the candle makers are running online sales, online businesses, and shipping their candles, this is a more and more important factor. How well that wax will hold up during hot weather shipping. And then an overall ease of use. Now this really entails several different factors. It could be talk about the packaging. Does it come in wax flakes? Does it come in slabs? Does it come in a bag like a Vaseline type texture? How well is it to pour? Is there a lot of air bubbles? Do you have to do a lot of kind of cleanup and heat gun at the top after it's settling? It's really this overall category about how well overall you think the wax is to use. Fragrance compatibility. Soy in general doesn't work with as many fragrance oils on the market as paraffin does, for example. Now, that doesn't necessarily refer to how well it throws. It's more about how well that fragrance works in that wax in general. Is it a compatible oil for that wax? And then next to that is hot throw. Obviously, how well fragrance oils on average throw in this wax. And now sometimes this can depend on compatibility. For example, there are fragrance oils that throw really well in every soy wax. And then of course there are fragrances that don't throw well in soy wax. So what hot throw category really is if you were to take your average oil, one that you know is a known good oil that throws well in on average in most waxes, how does this wax compare to that? And then cold throw, the same thing. And then the last category I have is wicking and overall burn. And this is just, how difficult is it to wick this wax? And when you do have it wicked, how well is the overall burn? You could split that into two categories, but I consider that almost wicking and performance as one category. So those are the list of categories. To save some time, I'm not going to go through and randomly put in numbers and for each of these fictional waxes. So I'm just going to copy a set of data that I already had and just fill these in. There we go. So as you can see, I assigned a random score to each one of these waxes, and over on the far right you will see a total score. And let me get rid of that border. It's because I copied it. Okay, so here's all the data for these 5 waxes, and on the far right you'll see the total score for each, but again that total score is just summing all of these up for each wax. Now in this case the weighted score is going to equal the same, and that is because we're using the default weight, which means every category is weighted evenly across the board. So the weighted score and total score will add up. So right now these are in alphabetical order. If I were to go to weighted score, and every one of these categories, by the way, you can filter or sort by each one. We're going to sort by weighted score, largest to smallest, so we're seeing the highest score first. And you'll see wax B and E come out the same at 38. Wax D is 37, wax C is 36, and then coming up in the rears is wax A at 31. Again, this means you have no preference towards any of these factors whatsoever, which is almost always not the case, but that is because everyone is going to assign different factor weights. I left everything even across the board to begin with. So let's see what happens if we choose some different weighted numbers up here. Which categories do we care the most about? And again, I use these same examples in the wax review video that I posted recently, but let's assume that a person cares the most about how easy a wax is to use, its overall ease of use. And so to do that, these are the scores, the weights that I put. Let me go in order so it makes more sense. So overall ease of use would of course be a number 1. That's the most important. Surface and texture would be a 2. Jar adhesion may be a 3. Wicking and burn could be a 4. And then we'll do cost and availability would be a 5. I mean, that does play into how easy a wax is to use. And then the rest of them, it doesn't really matter in this case. We're going to go hot weather shipping is a 6. Ready and cure time is 7. Arguably, that could be higher as well. And then fragrance for this person maybe is of less concern as long as they're using, as long as they've tested out their oils with their wax. So I just set these weighted factor scores up to someone who is looking mostly for ease of use. Now we've got totally different scores. You can see these are no longer in order. Before, B, E, and D were number 1, 2, and 3. We're going to resort these. And you can see now E, D, and C are numbers 1, 2, and 3. And they have new weighted scores that do not equal the total score. And that is because the scores now are based off of the weight of each of these factors or variables that are most important to you. So another example real quickly. Let's say the next person cares the most about fragrance. Well, let's change all these back to default just so it's a little easier. By the way, all of these they need to be unique, or the scores really won't make a lot of sense. So make sure that if you are going to use weighted scores, you do 1 through 10. And sometimes if you're changing them as you go, that can be a little difficult. So what I do is I just change one to default. I just put them all back to default. Just copy and paste default back in there. So let's say this next person cares the most about fragrance though. We're going to go 1 for hot throw. We're going to go 2 for fragrance compatibility. 3 for cold throw. We're going to go 4 for ready and cure time. 5 for wicking and burn. And then again, these, I'm just going to pick at random here. 8, what do I got left? 9, and then jar adhesion being 10. In this case, we will resort. Now wax B is the favorite. It has a high score because it scores the best across the board when it comes to fragrance throw. And then wax C is a little closer, and then wax A apparently isn't one of the greatest throwing waxes, at least comparably, right? And that could be for several reasons. And then how about one more example? Let's say someone is looking for a fragrance. Let's say you want to customize this form for you to include whether or not it is a natural wax. You're looking for soy content or organic natural content versus paraffin. So let's say to do that, you don't care about hot weather shipping. Well, you can just swap out hot weather shipping and you can add in soy, organic, well, I did capital for everything else, natural. So we just changed the category. If this is something you care more about than something else, you can go ahead and just change it. And now let's say set all these back to default and start over. This person, most important thing to them is whether or not it is a natural candle. And then they care ease of use and cost availability, surface and texture before. This doesn't really matter at this point because the most important thing to them is its natural content. 7. So you can just pick whatever. You put them in the order that you think is most important to you. 9, and I'm missing 1, 10. So now let's score one more time. Sort, and wax E jumps up. And so wax D here jumped all the way up to number 2 because it is the most natural and organic of them all, but you can see it's really tied for first. It's still kind of up there with wax E. And wax E has only got a 3 in organic, which probably means it's a parasoy, right? But it's beating wax D in enough other categories that it's still tied or slightly above it. So this is why I mentioned you can edit the weighted points for your liking. If you feel that whether or not the wax is a natural wax is much more important than 25% weight, you can adjust that. If you think that that is so important that you need to give that a 50% importance or even higher, you can do that. Just know that if you change this one to 50, you're going to have to lower everything else because this total needs to be 1. And so I designed this intentionally in a way to be very flexible and customizable to your preferences. I hope that makes sense. I hope this kind of walkthrough wasn't overly confusing. I really just wanted to show you the flexibility of this worksheet, and I did that on purpose because we all care about different factors and we all have different preferences. So again, if you do click this link, it should take you to a template that you can make a copy of, and the template by default will have everything weighted the same, and then you can customize it from there. Obviously, you wouldn't have wax ABCD here. You would put 464, 6006, Joy Wax or Pro Blend 600, something like that. You would fill this out, and you can just keep adding waxes to it. The more that you sample new waxes and test new waxes, then you can go ahead and input that data. How does it compare to the other waxes? This is kind of a living document. So over time, the more and more you get experience, the more waxes you test, you can really start seeing kind of how it adds up. Now, it was interesting for me. When I did this a couple weeks ago, I know the waxes that I use the most, but then I added another wax that I really hadn't used in a long time. And it was actually IGI 4627, which is a straight paraffin wax, and it is really known for its hot throw more than anything else. But it can be a little messy to work with at first. It's got some drawbacks too, just like any wax. But I realized that no matter how many times I tweaked my factors that I cared about the most, it kept staying towards the top all the time. And so it got me thinking, maybe that's a wax I should go back to again. And that's one of the benefits of using a tool like this is you might feel like you are leaning towards a certain wax, But then when you really put it down on paper, what do I care about? Let me prioritize the things that matter the most to me. You might surprise yourself with what your answer is. And you might surprise yourself with what wax you should be looking at potentially. And so I find this to be a nice, powerful tool. Again, it is free. It's linked in the description below. I would love to get your feedback on this and see what you think. And the last thing I'll say is kind of a warning when you are using this document. I tried to lock any fields down that shouldn't be edited, and they're not really locked. They just give you a warning if you try to change anything that says, be careful, you're editing a cell that shouldn't be changed. And it gives you the option to continue, but I would just be careful. Let me show you an example. The reason is they all have so many formulas in them. For example, total score is really just a sum, so it's not a big deal. It's kind of easy to fix, but weighted score gets a little trickier. You can see the formula up here, and it's referencing lookup values from these cells up here and these tables over here. In fact, if you look at one of these values here, it's got a lookup formula that's looking at this table. And so I'm not going to get into all the nerdy details about it. But my point is just be a little careful if you do try to edit one of those fields. You are going to get a warning, or you should get a warning to be careful in doing that. So anyways, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Once again, the link is in the description. I love your feedback in the comment section on what factors you care the most about, as well as if you think this worksheet could be something useful to you over time. And feel free to please share this video out. I'm sure there's a lot of people that can find this tool useful. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks for coming by. Bye.